So we're on page 267. We're going to be finishing up the lessons today because these next several topics are really dealing with the church environment, the church culture that we live in ourselves today. What is going on around us? I don't mean to say what's going on that's bad, even though it is bad. But when I say bad, we're talking specifically Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, cults, Islam. That's bad. But then you have these churches that have evolved out of neo-evangelicalism. Neo-evangelicalism, as I like to say, is sloppy fundamentalism. Okay, it's got much the same statement of faith that we do, but they engage in some worldly type practices. They're not as careful in their distinctions and things like that. And so the church growth movement on 267, the emergent church on 268, the Calvinistic resurgence, critical race theory on page 271, lordship salvation on 270. These are prominent type movements within our society that we as fundamentalists, we are operating amongst them. I'm not saying we're operating against them, even though we really are, but it's more like we're operating amongst them. And this speaks of the mentality of the age. And the mentality of the age is what is significant when you're thinking of the Laodicean age, the lukewarm age. And so that becomes very significant for us. So these movements, and there could be other things too. Okay, these are some big movements that were out there, and there are other things as well. But this is kind of representative of what we're living amongst. Okay, so the church growth movement, and this is going to be interesting. Paragraph 795 says the church growth movement is a movement within Christianity that emerged in the mid-20th century with the goal of promoting church growth and expanding the influence of Christian churches. Sounds good. It's a noble idea. I mean, I want to have an impact on the culture around me. It's often associated with strategies and principles aimed at numerical growth and increased outreach. I like numerical growth. I like increased outreach. And so we're going to be talking about the differentiation between this. So this was emergence in the mid-20th century. It says the church growth movement began to take shape in the 1950s and 1960s as a response to concerns about declining church attendance and the need for churches to adapt to changing cultural and demographic trends. Now, this is not speaking of Baptist concerns. Fundamentalist Baptists, you would think, well, yeah, we don't want declining church attendance. They're coming from a different mentality, though. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But these are churches that have developed out of the old social gospel type outreaches. In fundamentalism, and the kind of churches that we come from, we've got a great concern about evangelism. And we have always been very missionary minded. When we say missionary minded, we mean people to go out and preach the gospel. And that's what being missionary minded is. However, in the old social gospel orders, like where you had the churches that didn't have the same eschatology as us, we're looking for Jesus Christ to come back and that we're out of here. We believe in that premillennial, pre-tribulation return of Christ. These other churches are coming from maybe Protestant backgrounds, and then maybe non-denominational, where they think basically they don't have that same pre-trib mindset as us. They think that they thought most specifically that they were going to change the culture so much that Christ would then come down and take his throne because the church had done such a wonderful job. They didn't look at the book of the Revelation as future history. They thought when Laodicea was mentioned that Laodicea was just one of the churches back then, and that's what it was. Okay, what we see it as representative of this age being a lukewarm age. So out of the uh, the social gospel kind of perception, where they were preaching not the salvation of souls, they were preaching about the salvation of society and redeeming society by getting society to have better rules and better management, when we were saying, no, what we need is better hearts instead. Okay. They were they were going for the culture, but it was a culture that was made up of, as far as they were concerned, of non-believers. They just thought that the Christians could impact the government structures so much that that would be sufficient. Okay, we look at it as, no, we need change hearts first, and then so they've got the process reversed. So when they looked at declining attendance, it was because they were not being missionary minded, and so as a result, not being preaching the gospel so much, what they did was increase the programs and try to perfect the programs that they were doing, as if it was a marketing decision in order to grow the church. And I'm hearing somebody, before I find out who it is, turn your phones off. Okay. I don't have many people to call on and figure it out. Okay, yeah. So though some of these things that I'm reading, is that you? Go ahead, turn that thing off. Turn that sound off. Yeah, turn the sound down. Turn the sound all the way down. Okay. I have a joke I'm going to play sometime. I'll have something go off, and I'll say, "Oh, bring me that phone," and it'll be a fake phone, and I'll smash and say, "Okay, anybody else want to turn the sound down?" Okay, but anyhow, okay, so the church growth movement was more about better marketing and better programming in order to draw people in, different from somebody being missionary minded. And so they used a word because they had maybe some guilt over how they were failing. They came up with, well, say, missions is very important. And so they became missional. I do not like the word missional. Okay, missional is a word to describe how the church is on a mission in the world. Their mission is to improve society. Okay, wrong mission. Okay, so fundamentalists, they are talking a different language, and when they say missionary or missions, it's with the intention of preaching the gospel. So that's what's different about church growth. Now, Elmer Towns, who is very possibly still alive today, I think as a couple of years ago, he was 91, and he had been down at Liberty University and with Jerry Falwell and all, and was very a great proponent of Sunday school growth. Now, Sunday school growth means go out and be a missionary, share the gospel, and bring people in to get discipled. Okay, so what he was about was different from this missional aspect, and so it was a lot about Sunday school growth. However, one of the influences of promoting that, I think, it became slightly off track, where churches became interested in in having greater numbers. Well, how is that different from the church growth movement? Well, uh, the different source, okay, greater church numbers by virtue of sharing the gospel versus greater church numbers by increasing programs and marketing. Elmer Towns was critical of the church growth movement at the same time. So we're talking, it's like we're using the same words, but we got different definitions. We're using the same words, but we're speaking a different language from them. So the key figures included Donald McGavran, who is often regarded as one of the figures of the church growth movement. He wrote a book, The Bridges of God, and he laid the foundation for many of the movement's ideas. Other influential leaders in the movement, please do. Well, if you turn the sound down, the notification sound, yeah. Okay. There were other influential leaders in the movement, including Peter Wagner, John Wimber, and George Hunter, and these are people whose theology that we are critical of. Okay, so the foundational principles, paragraph 796, the church growth movement emphasized the use of sociological and marketing principles to understand and reach target audiences. It emphasized the importance of homogeneous units, some people say homogeneous, people with similar backgrounds and needs as a strategy for church planning and growth. I think that sounds about as bad as it actually is. We want to go out after everybody. Tony, you've heard me say, go after everybody, even if they're a little bit, yeah. Okay, everybody gets a chance to hear the gospel. But if you're going to have a program and you're going to invest in the program, you've got to, and you're doing this as a matter of marketing, then you're going to pick your audience that you're trying to reach. And of course, you want to reach the most prosperous audience. So why? You can build better programs and reach more people for Christ. Well, wait a second. If you're going to target for marketing efficiency a demographic that's in their mid-20s to mid-30s, who are, to use an older term, yuppies, young upwardly mobile professionals, then what you're doing is you're being a respecter of persons, aren't you? So you can see where this would become problematic. The movement advocated for the use of contemporary worship styles, just because it's got greater sensational appeal. Innovative programming and seeker-friendly approaches to make churches more accessible to non-believers. And I've heard language like this over time. It's like, well, we want to try to bring in as many people for Christ so we can get the gospel to more people. Okay, we sort of have a crossover here. Yeah, I want to bring more people in, but I've seen in places where people are practicing some of these church growth things, and they're just as small. And it's not like this is a magical formula. It's not mechanical that you can just start the machine, put the machinery in place, hit the switch, and have it put out people. So I could say, well, something like that would be saying, okay, well, our offerings have been such and such. Our programs have been, so effective so far in this last year. And when I draw a chart and I have my statistics, I can see that I got an upward trending. So next year we should be 10% bigger. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, maybe things will change. Microphone. Where are the microphones? Yeah, there they are. And I've seen places where it was maybe not.
If I remember correctly, in one of the earlier mega church builders was Bill Hybels and if Willow Creek.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, I believe the outreach method that they used was they would go door knocking and they would ask people if they were going to church. And if they were, they would encourage them to keep going. But if they came to a house where they weren't, they would ask them why they weren't, and if they had stopped going, why they stopped going.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a, like you said, it was more like a marketing scheme because maybe they thought, maybe some people thought, oh, church music is too boring. So their conclusion would be, oh, we have to, spice up the music program. And of course, that's going to be, that would explain all the contemporary services. They thought, oh, well, they don't have programs for single parents or whatever the case might be. They're like, I wasn't having my needs met.
Yeah.
So it all became like a needs-based,
Needs driven. Yeah, that's a good point.
needs-based programming because 30% of our respondents said they want this and 20% want that. So they built up a church model that was catering to what people quote unquote said they needed. And yeah, I mean, the whole seeker-friendly concept, it's a good one. I mean, because we should be friendly to everybody, including the seekers, but being seeker friendly shouldn't mean compromising, what the church is supposed to do in order to meet the quote unquote or perceived needs of what people want, because church is not designed to be, oh, well, I'm coming to get all my needs fulfilled.
Right.
You should be coming to church to get your greatest need fulfilled because you need to get the gospel, and that's the greatest need that we have. But that's really the only need that should be out there. And I'm not saying that we don't help people. Of course, we do that, but that's not
Primary.
that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to help people by getting them saved and then taking care of their biggest need. And then as they grow in Christ, they can start to, begin to, repair their lives through spiritual living, and we can certainly assist in that. But again, we're not we're not a charity organization to cater to everybody's needs. We do what we can, of course.
Yeah.
But that's not our primary function.
Yeah, perceived needs is a big issue. There's, people we don't respond to people's perceived needs because we are not a Christian therapy center. Now, there is therapy that does go on. It's called the worship service when we preach, the Bible. So it's like we are impacting those concerns, but it's not like, well, we got to help people out of the depression, to help their marriages. I don't try to help people's marriages. I want to try to help them become stronger Christians, which will then help their marriages. Okay, so that might take many forms, but that's the outlook. That's the thing that's driving the church. When we say that we are preaching to needs, the needs that we're preaching to are there's 6 of them. One is the evangelistic need, the need to be able to get saved or to teach others how to get saved. You got I got a social and you got a devotional and ethical need, to build one's faith and then to act upon it. There are social needs, but the social needs are how do we relate to each other in order to help each other become better Christians. And then you can have doctrinal needs, apologetic needs. There are a number of things that are like that. So, but it's all going to be Bible based. Okay, let me teach you what the Bible says. Now, it's one thing to be going after all people with the gospel versus going after all people to attend church. There will be times where you have to say to somebody, unless if you get your act together, no, you're not going to be allowed to come in and disrupt everything. And so we're actually very conscious of that and very, very thoughtful about that. So if you're going after a group, what you're doing is you're really ignoring the other groups because, as suggests in James chapter 2, we're really looking down on them. We're saying to the rich, come and sit up here in the front seat, and you other people, you go sit back there. Okay. Actually, what that should be is reversed. All the stronger believers, they go to take the back pews. Okay, they don't want to be right up under the pulpit. Okay, that thing's on wheels. I should move that to the back of the church sometime. Yeah. Okay. So the movement promoted, this is paragraph 797, the movement promoted the idea of intentionally planning new churches, but why? As an effective means of reaching unchurched populations. It encouraged churches to analyze their local context and adapt their ministry approaches accordingly, which will only reach a percentage of the population when they do that. They employed marketing techniques, small group ministries, and outreach events to attract new members. Now, we'll do advertising. See, we'll sort of do some of the same things, but with a different goal in mind, not just to increase attendance, but to just be an avenue to go out there and do what? Preach the gospel. Okay, the church growth movement had a significant influence on Christianity globally, particularly through mission work and the spread of mega churches in various countries. Its strategies and principles were adopted by churches and denominations worldwide, contributing to the growth of Christianity in regions where it was previously less prevalent. Now, I have a message that I'd like to share with college students that details some of these mega church leaders and their regrets over the program because it didn't really affect change in the disciples. And so there becomes a problem when a pastor becomes pastor of a mega church. I don't know that you can call him pastor anymore. Why? At what point does he actually pastor anybody? I mean, if you've got a church of 10,000 people and you want to go to a coffee fellowship, okay, you got 10,000 of them to go to, or you bring them on in and you just sort of stay in one corner and they all be somewhere else. You're not pastoring them. So I am not going to totally decry the benefit of larger churches, and that's fine. But at some point, you've got to, I think at some early point, you got to consider, well, what are we actually getting to do? Okay. Criticisms and controversies. The church growth movement has faced criticism for its focus on numerical growth at the expense of theological depth and discipleship. And that's what I just mentioned about 5 or 6 church leaders that are like that, the regrets they've had. Some have raised concern about a consumeristic approach to church that caters to people's preferences rather than emphasizing the transforming power of the gospel. Some churches and leaders moved away from the church growth movement's methods, emphasizing a more holistic approach to church health and discipleship. Okay, you can read paragraph 800. Now there is the emergent church on page 268. This was another movement that was trying to be missional. Both groups tried to be missional. Both groups realized that they were failing on the job, and so they said about the same thing. Now the problem, and I'm just going to give an overview of this without going into the significance of it. The emergent church was more in tune with postmodernistic thinking, which suggested that there's no such thing as objective truth and objective morality, and they would actually sit around in their studies and they would vote on what the truth was and what the passage meant, rather than have somebody who would do the study and that would do real study that would differentiate what the words meant and what was going on in the context in order to be able to give an interpretation that actually represented what the original writer said. Okay, so that was the problem with the emergent church. Now, also, and that, by the way, the emergent church has sort of fizzled out. Some of its leaders, I can't remember whether some of them died or exactly what happened, but the emergent church has sort of fizzled out, but that mentality still is around us. Okay, another mentality that we have is the Calvinistic resurgence. Okay, and this has happened periodically in society where Calvinism was strong, and then churches were not really growing, and missions were not really happening, and so the people that would be concerned about proper evangelism, what they would do is react against that, and they would grow, and then people would say, "Oh, that guy over there sounds really smart." Okay, he uses big words and has these concepts, and he's got a whole system worked out. Uh, and they do a lot of talking, but you have to do a lot of talking in a case like that in order to justify error, okay, because you have to keep covering problems over. Okay, so paragraph 807, this movement represents a renewed emphasis on the theological teachings associated with John Calvin and the Reformed tradition. Late 20th century resurgence of interest in Reformed theology can be traced back to the latter half of the 20th century. Prominent figures like R.C. Sproul, theologian and founder of Ligonier Ministries, began to articulate and promote Reformed doctrines during this period. Next bullet point, you have John Piper, John MacArthur, and Tim Keller. John MacArthur and Tim Keller are with the Lord right now. In Piper's ministry, Desiring God, Keller's leadership in Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City played significant roles in popularizing Reformed theology. And out of Tim Keller comes a popular notion of wanting to redeem the culture. And if you remember some preaching over the years, I do not like redeeming the culture. I like redeeming people who then redeem, who then impact the culture. Are you raising your hand for stretching? Stretching, okay. Getting a cramp out, yeah. Okay, and so in the early 2000s, in the last bullet point, the Gospel Coalition, an organization that promotes Reformed theology and gospel-centered ministry, was founded in 2005. This coalition of pastors and theologians aim to foster theological discussion and provide resources for a new generation of Christians. Okay, so one of the things is that comparable to what the Marxists do in a negative way by trying to take over seminaries and colleges and teaching positions. This is, what has happened in our seminaries and Bible colleges also, and it sort of has destroyed some of the colleges that were very powerful at one point. And this happened back in the 1920s also, which gave rise to fundamentalism. So if you get into these positions and you're controlling the presses and the publishers and things like that, you're going to get that resurgence. Now, what happens though out of this is that you say, well, what about the fundamentalists? The fundamentalists are pretty much out there soul winning and preaching in the churches. They're not really trying to do all that writing. That doesn't mean that they're failing. It means that they're busy otherwise. And there are efforts to try to encourage fundamentalist pastors to really get into writing. But you see, a lot of these other guys, they've pursued an academic track rather than a ministerial track. And so they got the academics and they got the arguments that they're promoting out there. And by virtue of controlling the publishing area, that's what people are getting to read. Right now, there are some of us that are actually trying to get more writing going out. The pastor's blog on we have like 3 websites we work from. The church's website, my personal commentary website, and then there's a business website for publishing. And the personal website has really become more of a forum for pastors to try to also write, and we're trying to encourage them, write. And Pastor Swakowski has contributed articles to that, but it's a little bit of a challenge. We'll do our part, whatever we can do to overcome that. And so this is what's reflected here in paragraph 808. The availability of theological resources on the internet and the rise of social media platforms further accelerated the spread of Reformed theology in the early 21st century. Blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, and online forums allowed people to access Reformed teaching and engage in theological discussions. Now, has something happened to work against that kind of impact? Yeah, there are several websites. There's a fellow by the name of Flowers. What's his first name? Do you remember? Leighton Flowers. Okay, and he's powerfully into dealing with the Calvinistic issue, and he's out in the Southern Baptist Seminary teaching out there, and there are others like him. And then you have somebody like David Wood, who's very impactful regarding Islam. So there are voices that are out there. One of the problems that comes out is that people being people, they jump on a bandwagon and they don't listen. So we try to work on getting them to listen. So we have on page 270, the provisionist reaction. Fundamentalists have stood against Calvinism and Arminianism. Provisionism has become more defined in response to the Calvinistic resurgence. We have unlimited atonement in contrast to the Calvinists. Christ died for the sake of all to provide, and that's where provisionism comes from, to provide for salvation. There's conditional election. When we talk about the sovereignty of God, we're talking two separate languages. Calvinist believes in sovereignty in a deterministic way. We look at sovereignty as moral sovereignty. Instead of deterministic sovereignty, we say moral sovereignty. He is owed as a sovereign our faith and our allegiance. But the condition is we got to accept total depravity. We believe total depravity, meaning that people are pervasively sinful, that they're tainted. When a Calvinist says it, he means something different. He means total inability to get saved. Synergistic soteriology. Both God and human beings cooperate in the process. God provides the salvation, and we provide the attention. Okay. Human free will. We have responsibility, meaning that we are not held to account. It means, in fact, that was something that I was actually referring to today in the morning. We have the ability to respond. They do not think that you have an ability to respond. You just have, they mean accountability rather than responsibility. Prevenient grace. Yeah, we believe in prevenient grace. We're given the Bible. You read the Bible, and faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. They mean by prevenient grace that people are forced to get saved. We have an evangelistic zeal, especially when we realize that it depends on the preaching, that then we have to get out and have that evangelistic zeal. Now, what has come about, I'm going to just summarize this next section, is the idea of lordship salvation. This is something that John MacArthur came up with as a Calvinist. This is a concern everybody has, is why is it people won't stop sinning? Okay, and so what ends up happening is that works gets confused with faith, because they say, well, if you were saved, you wouldn't do these terrible things. Well, how much terrible things wouldn't you do? 80%? 81%, is that enough terrible things not to do? 89, 99%, yeah, but you still got that stuff. You're harboring that sin in your heart. And the fact of the matter is we're human. If we had 70% behavior and working on the rest, that's a good plan to try to work with. But to say, oh, you must not be saved because you've got sin in your life, and Christ is not Lord of your heart. No, he's Lord of my heart. I'm just a bad person, and a bad boy sometimes. Okay, so lordship salvation can and I read this from John MacArthur. It sounded like it was works were necessary for salvation, and I know he does not believe that, but the way he was writing it, I thought, well, that's what it sounds like, and you've got to downplay that. But then that might distract from having Christ as Lord. Okay. Critical race theory. Okay, so we live in such a time where that has become the way Marxism has crept back into churches. That same mentality in the late 1800s was there in the social gospel, that if we can just get society organized and we can get charity organized and we can get all our government programs organized, we'll have saved society. That was just Marxism. Okay, it was essentially class warfare. But now it goes under the guise of critical race theory, because that is one of the plans of the diversity efforts, is to produce conformity instead. It's the class warfare. Somebody has said, in fact, I was just listening to this yesterday, somebody, the Marxists complain that you got all those greedy capitalists. Capitalists are not greedy, okay? Capitalism, you can't survive as a capitalist in a free market system unless if you're not thinking of self and you're thinking of the customer. Because if you don't think of the customer, somebody else will, and they'll go and buy there. But what Marxism depends on is true greed when they promote class warfare. I'm poor, you're rich, I envy you, I have greed towards your wealth. And then now somebody who's as poor as me, yeah, but I'm more disadvantaged than they are. So now it produces envy against even classes on the same economic level. So that's the system that's actually oriented towards greed, and oriented towards envy. And we see the latest of that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. There were a bunch of churches that were jumping on that bandwagon, but there were a bunch of churches that were prepared to jump on that bandwagon. Does anybody remember anything about the Berrigan brothers? Berrigan brothers? Anybody remember that? Yeah, can you want to speak to into the microphone? Yeah, let's get you another microphone. Well, yeah, I want them to hear it at home, though. And this has got good batteries in it. Just that's all.
They were priests in the 1960s that championed social causes, all the wrong ones,
Yeah.
of course. But
Class warfare again.
but whenever they did it, it was okay for religious people to get involved with state issues. But try and let a conservative have concerns, and they'll shut it right down and say, "Oh no, separation of church and state."
Yeah.
So they really capitalized on their reaching certain types of people and playing on their victimhood.
Yeah. And ultimately, what you get is where the people that have such envy, they start eating their own. And it's like some of the ICE protesters out in Minnesota have been turned on by other ICE protesters because they thought that they were ICE and things like that. They started eating their own. I remember a time when Jesse Jackson was, when he was running to, for the Democratic nomination. And I remember somebody calling in and saying, yeah, but he can't run because he's a minister and you have to have separation of church and state. And my reaction was the same as the talk show host. No, that's not the same thing as separation of church and state. Anybody's allowed to run for president. So yeah, you can do that. But no, class envy will crop up and again eat their own. I'm glad he didn't win the nomination, but I wasn't glad whoever got that nomination. So yeah, Brother Joe.
Yeah, I think a lot of this class warfare stems from the misunderstanding between equality of opportunity and equity.
Yeah.
And there's, it's people think that, well, if somebody has more than you, it's not fair. It doesn't matter that they may have worked harder for it,
Yeah.
or worked longer hours for it. They don't take any of those things into consideration. It's just like you said, it's envy. It's like they have something that I want or I don't have. That's not fair.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee. The preamble, the Declaration of Independence says that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit
Yeah.
of happiness. It doesn't guarantee happiness, and besides, you can't. There's no way to guarantee happiness because everybody's concept of happiness is different. You take 10 people and say, "What makes you happy?" There's going to be some crossover, but basically, everybody's going to have a different answer for that. So you can't even guarantee that. Even if you gave everybody the same amount, I remember hearing a theoretical experiment. If they just tore everything down and gave everybody $25,000 to start a new thing, they said everybody would pretty much eventually wind up where they are now.
Yeah.
Because people, the smart people are going to do smart things with the money. Other people are going to spend it foolishly. And then, the people that spend all their money on foolish things are going to be back in that, oh, how come he has more than I do?
Yes.
Oh, he worked harder than, but doesn't matter he worked harder than me, or it doesn't matter he invested his
Yeah.
money wisely. Well, it's not fair.
Yeah.
So that's all you get. And that's what all of this class warfare is all about. It's you didn't do something smart. Okay, we'll fix it for you. But
Yeah.
but just let us be we need to be empowered in order to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So having a framework that says there's class warfare is nothing more than promoting class envy, the true ones that promote envy. Okay. So the challenges of the age, the last 2 pages here then. This age will not be characterized by the challenges it faces, but by capitulation to the world. Now, I will say this. We've heard some people talking, and you hear this every once in a while, and I'll enjoy it, whether it comes to fruit or not. But the younger generations are sort of more concerned about God, as one commentator was saying, and it was relatively trustworthy. And that'll be fine. We'll take whatever. If we get a revivalistic surge, that's fine. Ultimately, though, the world is going to lose by winning. They're going to win their arguments, and that's when they really lose. So Nancy and I like to hold hands so we can go up into the rapture together. Okay. Okay, so the challenges of the age, bibliology, modern versions. It should be noted that from time to time, different translations have been touted as the best improvement. It was true of the Revised Standard Version in the early 20th century, then the New American Standard Version, followed by the New International Version, and then its updated version, which is today's New International Version, and lately the English Standard Version. With all the new versions, the King James Version is still the most trusted English Bible, which stands alone in its class. Theology proper, the impact on this major systematic theological area is that feminist theology has popularized a female identity for God. Paragraph 817, process theology, which treats God as evolving and does not necessarily know the future. Under Christology, in modern times, various theological discussions and debates on Christology have taken place. These include explorations of the quote-unquote historical Jesus. Oh, I want to know the real Jesus, right? Yeah. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The quest for the historical Jesus, different interpretations of the atonement, and diverse understandings of the person and work of Christ. And then under eschatology, amillennialism has become more popular, and I'm surprised. I mean, I'll tell you what's really affected by that, and the evidence of that is all the anti-Semitism that we're witnessing. And now they're just blatantly anti-Semitic. And, the cry was always, well, we don't want to go back to John Crow era, and we don't want to go back to strange fruit hanging from trees. Well, yeah, you're doing that to the Jews again. Okay, so the mentality is the same. Did I say John Crow? Jim Crow. Yeah. John is his cousin. He's the one doing Jim Crow era. Okay. Hyper-dispensationalists have sought to find more divisions. Some have popularized the idea that Christ will return near the middle of the tribulation before a period known as the Great Tribulation. And at the same time, you have those who deny millennialism, and they don't even like the book of Revelation at all. Okay, so this is really the final nutshell of what we're living amongst. And so what our answer is to preach the gospel. Boy, doesn't that sound familiar? Same thing, same business in the last 2,000 years. Okay, so we're closing this out. Are there any questions you would like to ask? Yes. Yeah. Which speaks to how new you are. We were out doing that yesterday. Yeah, we didn't wait, and we did it in January. We didn't wait for the good weather. Yeah, but you're spot on. Yeah, everywhere we can get, anywhere you can go. We could take maybe somebody is. Let's say you guys. Well, if you can get into them, maybe somebody is. Let's say they're hanging around Quick Check or something an awful lot, and they got tracks on them. There you go, right there. And then, Nancy, whenever we get to the cash register, she has more tracks in her purse than I have in my purse. Yeah. I don't have a purse. She's got them all. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you can do that, but don't be surprised if some zealot comes and takes them down, saying no, no religious pushing. Depends on which religion you're pushing. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, wherever we can get it out. You could pretend. One could pretend that they were crazy and talking to themselves and talking about the gospel. How could they argue? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, very good. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. And next week we will be going into, we'll start on messages and we'll sing some hymns and things like that. And but the messages will be oriented towards practical Christian growth for a while. Brother Joe, would you lead us in a closing word of prayer?